The Prince and the Three Fates. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who was born to a king who ruled over a great country through which ran a wide river. The king was nearly beside himself with joy, for he had always longed for his son to inherit his crown, and he sent messages to beg all the most powerful fairies to come and see his wonderful baby. In an hour or two, so many were gathered around the cradle that the child seemed in danger of being smothered. But the king, who was watching the fairies eagerly, was disturbed to see them looking grave. "Is there anything the matter?" he asked anxiously. The fairies looked at him, and all shook their heads at once. "He is a beautiful boy, and it is a great pity. But what is to happen will happen," they said. "It is written in the books of fate that he must die, either by crocodile, by serpent, or by dog. If we could save him, we would, but that is beyond our power." And so saying, they vanished. For a time the king stood there where he was, horror-stricken at what he had heard. But being of a hopeful nature, he began at once to invent plans to save the prince from this dreadful doom that awaited him. He instantly sent for his master builder and bade him construct a long castle on top of a mountain, which would be fitted with the most precious things from the king's own palace and every kind of toy the child could wish to play with. Besides, he gave the strictest orders that a guard should walk around the castle night and day. For 4 or 5 years the baby lived in the castle alone with his nurses, taking his airings on the broad terraces, which were surrounded by walls, with a moat between them, and only a drawbridge to connect them to the outside world. One day, when the prince was old enough to run quite fast by himself, he looked at the terrace across the moat, and saw a soft little fluffy ball of a dog jumping and playing on the other side. Now, of course, all dogs had been kept from him in fear of the fairy's prophecy might come true, and he never had beheld one before. And so he turned to a page who was walking behind him and said, "What's that funny little thing which is running so fast over there?" "That is a dog, Prince," answered the page. "Well, bring me one like it. We will see which can run faster." And he watched the dogs till it had disappeared around the corner. The page was much puzzled to know what to do. He had strict orders to refuse the prince nothing, yet he remembered the prophecy and felt that this was a serious matter. At last he thought he had better tell the king the whole story and let him decide the question. "Oh, get him a dog if he wants one," said the king. "He will only cry his heart out if he does not have it." So a puppy was found, exactly like the other. They might have even been twins, but perhaps they were. Years went by, and the boy and the dog played together till the boy grew strong and tall. This time, at last, he had sent a message to his father, saying, "Why do you keep me shut up here, doing nothing? I know all about the prophecy that was made at my birth, but I would rather be killed at once than live an idle life, useless here. Give me arms, let me go, I pray you. Me and my dog." Again the king listened to his wishes, and he and his dog were carried in a ship to the other side of the river, which was so broad that it could almost have been a sea. A black horse was waiting for him, tied to a tree, and he mounted and rode away whenever his fancy took him, and the dog always at his heels. Never was any prince so happy as he, and he rode till at length he came to the king's palace. The king who lived in it did not care about looking after his country, and seeing that his people lived cheerful and contented lives, he spent his whole time in making riddles, inventing plans which he had much better have left alone. At the period when the young prince reached the kingdom, he had just completed a wonderful house for his only child, a daughter. It had 70 windows, each 70 feet from the ground, and he had sent the royal herald round to the borders of the kingdom to proclaim whoever could climb up the walls to the window of the princess would win her for a wife. The fame of the princess's beauty had spread far and wide, and there was no lack of princes who wished to try their fortune. Very funny the palace must have looked each morning, with the dabs of different colors on the white marble as the princes were climbing the walls. But though some managed to get further than the others, nobody ever got near the top. They had already been spending several days in this manner when the young prince arrived, and as he was pleasant to look upon and civil to talk to, they welcomed him to the house, which he had been given to them, and saw that his bath was properly perfumed after his long journey. "Where do you come from?" they said at last, "and whose son are you?" But the prince had reasons for keeping his own secret, and he answered, "My father is a master of the horse of the king of my country, and after my mother died, he married another wife. At first all went well, but as soon as she had babies of her own, she hated me, and I fled, lest she should do me some harm." The hearts of the other men were touched as they heard his story, and they did everything they could think of to make him forget his past sorrows. "What are you doing here?" said the youth one day. "We spend our whole time climbing the walls of the palace, trying to reach the windows of the princess," answered the young man. "But as yet, no one has reached within 10 feet of them." "Oh, let me try too," said the young prince. "But tomorrow I will wait to see what you do before I begin." So the next day he stood where he could watch all the young men go up, and he noted the places on the wall that seemed most difficult, and made his mind that when his turn came up, he would try some other way. Day after day he was seen watching the roofs, till one morning he felt that he knew the plan of the walls by heart, and took his place by the side of the others. Thanks to what he had learned from the failure of the rest, he managed to grasp one little rough projection after another, till at last, to the envy of all his friends, he stood on the sill of the princess's window. Looking up from below, they saw a white hand stretched forth to draw him in. Then one of the men ran straight to the king's palace and said, "The wall has been climbed, the prize has been won."
"By whom?"
cried the king, staring up from his throne.
"Which of the princes may I claim as my son-in-law?"
"The youth who succeeded in climbing to the princess's window was not a prince at all," answered the young man. "He is the son of the master of horse to a great king who dwells across the river, and he has fled his own country to escape from the hatred of his stepmother." At this news the king was very angry, for it had never entered his thought that anyone but a prince would seek to woo his daughter.
"Let him go back to the land whence he came," he shouted in wrath. "Does he expect me to give my daughter to an exile?"
He began to smash his drinking vessels in his fury. Indeed, he quite frightened the young man, who ran hesitantly home to his friends, and told the youth what the king had said. Now the princess, who was leaning from the window, heard his words and bade the messenger to go back to the king her father and tell him that he had sworn a vow never to eat and drink again until the youth was taken from him. The king was more angry than ever when he received that message, and ordered his guards to go at once to the palace and put the successful wooer to death. But the princess threw herself between him and his murderers. "Lay your finger on him, and I shall be dead before sunset," said she, and they saw that she meant it, and they left the palace and carried the tale to her father. By this time the king's anger was dying away, and he began to consider what his people would think of him if he broke the promise he had publicly given. So he ordered the princess to be brought before him, and the young man also. And when they entered the throne room, he was so pleased with the noble air of the victor that his wrath quite melted away, and he ran to him and embraced him.
"Tell me who you are,"
he asked, when he had recovered himself a little, "for I will never believe that you are not the son of royal-blooded with veins." The prince still had his reasons for remaining silent, and only told the same story. However, the king had taken such a fancy to the youth that he said no more, and the marriage took place the following day. Great herds of cattle and a large estate were given to the young couple. After a little while, the prince said to his wife, My life is in the hands of three creatures: a crocodile, a serpent, and a dog." "How rash you are!" cried the princess, throwing her arms around his neck. "If you know that, how can you have that horrid beast around you? It's, I will give orders to have him killed at once." But the prince would not listen to her. "Kill my dear little dog, who has been a playfellow with me since he was a puppy!" exclaimed he. "Never would I allow that." And all the princess could get from him was that he would always wear a sword, and have someone with him when he left the palace. When the prince and princess had been married a few months, the prince heard that his stepmother was dead, and his father was old and ill, and longing to have his eldest son at his side again. And longing to have his eldest son by his side again. The young man could not remain deaf to the message, and he took a tender farewell of his wife and set off to his journey home. It was a long way, and he was forced to rest often on the road, so it happened that one night, while he was sleeping in a city on the banks of a green river, a huge crocodile came silently up and made its way along a passage to the prince's room. Fortunately, one of the guards woke up as it was trying to steal past him, and shut the crocodile up in a large hall where a giant watched over it, never leaving the spot except in the night, when the crocodile slept, and this went on for more than a month. Now, when the prince found out that he was not likely to leave his father's kingdom again, he sent for his wife, and bade the messenger tell her that he would wait for her coming in town on the banks of the great river. This was the reason why he delayed his journey so long, and narrowly escaped being eaten by a crocodile. During the weeks that followed, the prince amused himself as best he could, though he counted the minutes to the arrival of his princess, and when she did come, he was prepared to start for the court. That very night, however, while he was asleep, the princess noticed something strange in the corners of the room. There was a dark patch, and seemed, as she looked, to grow longer and longer, to be moving slowly towards the cushions on which the prince was lying. She shrank in terror, but at sight of the noise the thing heard it, and raised its head to listen. Then she saw it was the long flat head of a serpent, and recoiled of the prophecy and rushed into her mind. Without her husband, she glided out of bed, and taking up a heavy bowl of milk which stood on the table, laid it on the floor in the path of the serpent, for she knew that no serpent could resist milk. She held her breath as the snake drew near, and watched it throw up its head again, as if it was smelling something nice, while its forky tongue darted out greedily. At length its eyes fell upon the milk, and in an instant it was lapping it so fast that it was to wonder that the creature did not choke, for it never took its head from the bowl as long as it had a drop left in it. After that it dropped to the ground, and slept heavily. This was what the princess had been waiting for, and snatching up her husband's sword, she severed the snake's head from its body. The morning after this adventure, the prince and the princess set out for the king's palace, but found when they reached it that he was already dead. They gave him a magnificent burial, and then the prince had to examine the new laws which had been made in his absence, and do a great deal of business besides, till he grew quite ill from fatigue, and was obliged to go away to one of his palaces on the banks of the river, in order to rest. He soon got better, and began to hunt, and shoot wild duck with his bow, and wherever he went, his dog, now grown very old, went with him. One morning the prince and his dog were out as usual, and in chasing their game they drew near the banks of the river. The prince was running at full speed after his dog when he almost fell over something that looked like a log of wood, which was lying in his path. To his surprise, a voice spoke to him, and he saw the thing which he had taken for a branch was really a crocodile. "You cannot escape me," it was saying, when he had gathered his senses again. "I am your fate, and wherever you go and whatever you do, you will always find me before you. There's only one means of shaking off my power. You can dig a pit in the dry sand which will remain full of water. My spell will be broken. If not, death will come to you speedily. I gave you this one chance. Now go."
The young man walked sadly away, and when he reached the palace, he shut himself in his room. For the rest of the day, he refused to see anyone, not even his wife. At sunset, however, as no sound could be heard through the door, the princess grew quite frightened, and made such a noise that the prince was forced to draw back the bolt and let her come in.
How pale you look, she said. Has anything hurt you? Tell me, I pray, what is the matter, for perhaps I can help.
So the prince told her the whole story, and of the impossible task given to him by the crocodile.
How can a sandy hole remain full of water? Asked he. Of course, it will all run through. The crocodile called it a chance, but he might as well drag me into the river at once. He said truly that I cannot escape him. Oh, if that is all, cried the princess, I can set you free myself. For my fairy godmother taught me how to use plants, and the desert is not far. There grows a little four-leaved herb, which is to keep the water in the pit for a whole year. I'll go and search for it at dawn, and then you'll begin to dig the hole as soon as you like.
To comfort her husband, the princess had spoken lightly and gaily, but she knew she had no light task before her. Still, she was full of courage and energy, and determined that, one way or another, her husband would be saved. It was still starlit when she left the palace on the snow-white donkey and rode away to the river straight to the west. For some time she could see nothing before her but a flat waste of sand, which became hotter and hotter as the sun rose higher and higher. Then a dreadful thirst seized her and the donkey, but there was no stream to quench it, and if there had been one she would have hastily taken time to stop, for she still had far to go, and she must be back before evening, or else the crocodile might declare that the prince had not fulfilled his conditions. So she spoke cheering words to her donkey, who brayed in reply, and the two pushed steadily on. Oh, how glad they were when they caught sight of the tall rock in the distance. They forgot that they were thirsty, and that the sun was hot, and the ground seemed to fly under their feet till the donkey stopped of its own accord in the cool shadow. But though the donkey might rest, the princess could not, for the plant, as she knew, grew on the very top of the rock, and a wide chasm ran around the foot of it. Luckily, she had brought a rope with her, and making a noose in one end, she flung it across with all her might. The first time, it slid back slowly into the ditch. She had to draw back up, and throw again. But the length of the noose caught on something, and the princess could not see what, and had to trust her whole weight upon this little bridge, which might snap and let her fall down into the deep rocks. And, in the case of her death, was certain of that of the prince. But nothing so dreadful happened, and the princess got safely to the other side, and then became the worst part of the task. As fast as she put her foot on the ledge of the rock, the stone broke away from under her, and left her in the same place as before. Meanwhile the hours were passing, and it was nearly noon. The heart of the poor princess was filled with despair, but she would not give up the struggle. She looked around till she saw a small stone above her which seemed rather stronger than the rest, and by only poising her foot slightly on it she may lay between. She managed by great effort to reach it, and this way, with torn and bleeding hands, she gained the top. And here there was such violent wind that was blowing that she was almost blinded by dust and obliged to throw herself upon the ground and feel for the precious herb. A few terrible moments she thought that the rock was bare, and that her journey had been for no purpose. Feel where she would, there was nothing but grit and stone, and suddenly her fingers touched something soft in a crevice. It was the plant, that was clear, but was it the right one? See, she could not, for the wind was blowing more fiercely than ever, so she lay where she counted the leaves. 1, 2, 3. Yes, there were 4. And plucking a leaf, she held it safe in her hand while she turned, almost stunned by the wind, to go down the rock. When she was safely over the side, all became still in a moment. She slid down the rock so fast that it was a wonder that she did not land in the chasm. However, by good luck, she stopped quite close to the rope bridge, and was soon across it. The donkey brayed joyfully at the sight of her, and set off at his best speed, never seeming to know that the earth under her feet was nearly as hot as the sun above him.
On the bank of the great river he halted. The princess rushed to where the prince was standing by the pit he had dug in the dry sand, with a huge pot of water beside it. A little way off the crocodile lay blinking in the sun, with his sharp teeth and whitey yellow jaws wide open. At a signal from the princess, the prince poured the water in the hole. The moment it reached the brim, the princess flung in the four-leaved plant. Would the charm work, or would the water trickle away through the sand? The prince fell victim to that horrible monster. For half an hour they stood with their eyes rooted to the spot, but the hole remained full as it was at the beginning, with a little green leaf floating on top. Then the prince turned with a shout of triumph, and the crocodile sulkily plunged into the river. The prince had escaped forever the second of the three fates. So there stood, looking at the crocodile and rejoicing he was free, and then he startled a wild duck flew past him, seeking shelter among the rushes that bordered the edge of the stream. In another instant, his dog dashed by in hot pursuit, and knocked heavily against his master's legs. The prince staggered, lost his balance, and fell into the river, where the mud and rushes caught him and held him fast. He shrieked for help from his wife, who came running, and luckily brought her rope with her. The poor old dog was drowned, but the prince was pulled to shore. "My wife," he said, "has been stronger than my fate.